challenges have been that this is a massive story. It's a huge professional challenge for people working at BBC News, but it's not a story that you can just leave behind. It's also one that's affecting all of us, affecting our families. It's a personal challenge for many people as well. And so that's difficult. That brings with it challenges. Having a large part of your workforce working from home brings with it challenges. And I think getting the tone of our coverage right as well is obviously really important, but also challenging. So I think there are a lot of challenges involved in it, and I think actually, to me, the key thing is that communication between your workforce and listening to what the audience is saying is key. Yeah, I mean, by and large, viewership has gone up. We saw a particular spike, obviously, around the start of the story. We've seen viewing figures going up for all our major news bulletins. We've also seen a kind of spike at lunchtime for television news, and obviously a spike around the 5 o'clock press conference moment. The 6 o'clock news in particular has seen very high viewing figures, and our website as well has seen consistently high page views. We've seen some levelling off of that, as you might expect, in the last few weeks, but they still remain very high. Well, like everybody else, we have adapted very quickly to the social distancing guidelines and the new kind of public health guidance. The way we do interviews has clearly changed significantly. We are doing many more down the line, very few within studios or within BBC buildings, and if we do, we're really careful about that. We are sending out of the building less, in order again to protect our staff's health and the public's health. But we do have a job to do reporting on the ground, and we're going to continue to do that, and that will mean sending reporters out, gathering pictures, gathering content, and speaking to people on the ground. I think we're obviously going to continue to cover the main news story, and a lot of that is pretty tragic around number of deaths and the government's response and holding the authorities to account for that. But I think we're also really keen to cover potential solutions. So whether that's looking at vaccines or treatments or testing, I think they will be key areas for us, and we are determined to look for positives within the story as well, so that it doesn't become an unremitting diet of death and tragedy. So we are specifically looking for where are the positives in this story. I think we're looking for either guests who have a direct experience of dealing with the coronavirus, so whether that's due to a family member or some kind of experience involved in the healthcare system or in the care home system or the education system. Equally, we're looking for expertise and for people who can explain the story more. I think that's also a key priority for us going forward, is to help people understand this virus and tell people what we know and what we don't know. And so people who have expertise is of vital value to us. Obviously, the content that the audience are responding to best is the head-on news stories, the key developments. But there's also a lot of interest in explanation, in information, in insight, in personal stories, and also in those positive stories around the lockdown and humour as well. So it's a rich array of stories, but I think it's important for us that we don't allow ourselves just to get drawn into a certain type of news agenda. We need to see that broad range of stories. think the data that we're most interested in is probably around the virus itself. But equally, I think there's quite a lot out there in terms of how are people reacting to this lockdown? What are they feeling about this lockdown? How is it impacting them economically? It's impacting so many different parts of society. So any kind of data that gives us a greater understanding of that, I think is really valuable. I think the most obvious example of a positive story which has worked is Captain Tom, who Breakfast have really led the way on. This is obviously the elderly gentleman who's been walking up and down his outside his house in order to raise a lot of money for the NHS. It seems to have unbelievably taken off and captured the nation's attention. But I think it also it shows the real desire out there for positivity and for people to have some hope amid all this. Yep, very interested in the charity sector. It's clearly one of the key parts of this story. And we know that there are some charities who are really struggling as a result of this crisis. So that's a story that we're looking at. So any kind of information on that is really useful to us. Overwhelmingly, our news agenda is dominated by coronavirus stories. I think that is what the audience would expect, because it's clearly dominating so much of everyone's lives at the moment. Equally, there is, of course, less other news happening because there's less other stuff going on in society and around the world, but we are still continuing to cover non-coronavirus stories, and we've found that some of those stories have actually been very popular with audiences as well. I couldn't give you an exact proportion because it flexes and changes, but a significant proportion of our staff are now working from home. That's in order to ensure social distancing within our BBC buildings, but it's also an obvious consequence of trying to protect everybody's health throughout this crisis and retain some resilience as well within our system. So significant proportion of our workforce is now working from home. Yes, at BBC News we are making a real effort to share content further across the course of the day, to roll stuff out earlier and then to see it lasting right through until our evening output. Yeah, I think that is an opportunity for us in terms of trying to give real value in terms of the trustworthiness of our news and the impartiality of our news and the information that we're getting to people that they vitally need. But I don't think it's something we can take for granted. This is clearly a story that not only requires information and expertise, but it also requires investigation, and it requires asking difficult questions. And I think it's important that the BBC does all those things.